Welcome to the Fertility Podcast. I'm Natalie Silverman, your host. I've been using my voice in my work for about 15 years now. I used to be on the radio. Now I'm podcasting and do a lot of voiceover work. Now, the Fertility Podcast has a whole host of episodes for you, from adenomyosis to zero sperm. It's total A to Z of all sorts of things that affect you on your fertility journey. I'm mum to a little boy called Phoenix after having successful ICSI treatment, and that was my reason for starting the podcast. And I hope that if you found us, then you'll realise that you are not alone. This podcast is to help educate and empower you. I brought together as many experts and tried to share as many of your stories as possible. And I now have my wonderful co-host.
I'm Kate Davis, a fertility nurse consultant, and I'm adamant that we can all do so much better at understanding our fertility. I'm really passionate about teaching you to take ownership of your fertility, teaching you practical steps, emotional coping strategies, and lifestyle changes that you can make to hopefully optimise your chances of conceiving.
Now you know who we are. All you need to do is enjoy the show. Welcome to a bonus episode of the Fertility Podcast. This is Kate and I last week having a catch up with Jen, who is IVF Pineapple on Instagram. Jen had her donor cycle cancelled and we wanted to have a chat with her. We're hoping that these kind of stories help you if you've had your cycle cancelled. Just hear that you're not alone with all of this. There's other people feeling exactly what you feel. So let us know your thoughts. You can drop us a line, email info@thefertilitypoddy.com.
My husband and I started trying to conceive about 8 years ago, and we were that really annoying couple who were really smug and just thought it would happen, and we were like, oh well, wouldn't be the end of the world. So looking back, actually, it's ridiculous that we ever even thought that. And for the first few years we weren't really that desperate, and it was actually quite convenient at the time that we weren't getting pregnant. And I think it was probably coming up to 3 years into it, we started to think, oh, this isn't going very well at all. And we then talked about things like IVF and decided that we just didn't really want to do it. We decided to go away for my 30th birthday, and we visited orphanages in Thailand. At the time we were really thinking about adopting abroad, which again, you know, was absolutely right for us at the time. We needed to sort things out financially to be able to do that, so we had a bit of a wait. We knew it was going to be a lengthy process, and about 10 months later we found out that I was pregnant. Very unexpectedly went for some scans and then found out that we'd had a miscarriage. And it wasn't really until that moment that me carrying a child or having a baby was that important to me. But that really did lead to a chain of events where ultimately I wanted to be pregnant, and I'm not very good at failure, I think, is probably the rationale behind it. So at that point we decided we wanted to explore fertility treatments, and despite the fact we'd been trying for 3 years at that point, we were told that we would it was knocking on 4 years actually, sorry. We were told we'd have to wait for a year before we could be referred for fertility treatment.
Why? What was the reason?
Because I got pregnant naturally.
You know, I find that I hear that all the time, and I find that one of the hardest things to actually to cope with, that why I suppose part of me understands it, but then from another point of view, when I'm sat in front of the patient that's saying that, I don't understand it because it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, and it was heartbreaking at the time. So we waited the year, we kept on trying naturally, and we heard all of the old famous, you'll get pregnant again, you're the most fertile 3 months after a miscarriage. And so we heard all of those things, and again I think we actually genuinely believed that it would just happen.
And had you at that point, Jen, done any tests to check either of you?
No, so I think our GP did some blood tests on me, just basic like day 2 or 3 blood tests, and they came back satisfactory. So they said, right, wait a year and we'll refer you. So we did that. We didn't fall pregnant naturally. We got referred to one of our local hospitals, and they offered us IUI, and she said, you're ovulating naturally, there's absolutely no problems. So we had a few cycles of IUI and it wasn't working, and I think we were on a waiting list at that point for IVF, and we really had again settled for, this isn't going to happen, it isn't going to work, we were quite prepared to just wait for IVF. And again, unexpectedly, we fell pregnant with IUI. This was actually my third pregnancy. I'd had a pregnancy years and years ago, which ended in miscarriage as well. And I think that always lulled us into this security that we would get pregnant and have a baby. And unfortunately, again, we had another miscarriage with the IUI. So we then went on to IVF. And it wasn't actually until our second or third IVF appointment they said I had an extremely low AMH. They said it was beyond a miracle, I quote, that I ever got pregnant with IUI or naturally. Because my AMH was so low, they said our only option would be IVF.
Jen, do you feel as though, because things didn't perhaps happen quickly with regards to any investigations, do you feel a little bit let down by the care that you received?
Yeah, I think if I had, I think all we ever get told is that age is so important in fertility. And had I known when I was 30 that I had an extremely low AMH, and I mean, it may not have been that low at that point, if they just checked my AMH when we had the miscarriage, we potentially could have had far more successful IVF cycles. Subsequently, we had three really quickly successive IVF treatments, none of which worked. Every cycle, I think we did get to transfer every cycle, but we only ever got one fertilised embryo transferred on day 3, and all of them were unsuccessful.
Yeah, so it's the quality of the eggs as well as the quantity, isn't it?
Yeah, and that again, we were assured at that cycle where we were told I had a low AMH, you're only 32, 33, you're young, you'll have really good egg quality, you're the patients that we see success in. So they really didn't prepare us at all that they wouldn't work. It was very positive, which you need to hear at that point. But I very much, before we'd even started, was looking into egg donation. I felt like that was going to be our most likely route of treatment. So after a third cycle of treatment was when we started to explore that. We had some difficult consultations where private clinics wanted us to continue treatment with my eggs. Despite the fact each cycle I asked for different adjustments to make sure that we tried everything. And eventually we ended up on a waiting list for an anonymous donor in the UK. But during that time, I met a lady on Facebook.
Ah, okay.
Brilliant. Okay. And I know that, from kind of communicating to you on Instagram and kind of following your process, I know that it's taken you a long time to get to this mindset of donor egg. But you've got there, haven't you? And you're kind of embracing that now.
Yeah, so I mean, it's about 3 years since we started fertility treatment, but definitely, and now we're at a point even where, and I think it's a hugely personal decision, but for us, an anonymous egg donor became something that I particularly struggled with more and more, and my husband has been really supportive of that, and now he's met our egg donor and all of her family, and we're all really good friends, so he even more supports that that's the right thing for us to do.
So we're talking about where you're at now in terms of you met your donor. We talked about you feeling let down before. Do you feel that you then gained better support as you kind of took charge of what was going to then happen with your treatment plans?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is about supporting yourself, isn't it? You've got to advocate for yourself. I'm not somebody who necessarily fights or argues with my clinic, but I would particularly advocate for things that I believe strongly in. And I think it's important to make those choices and be really firm in them before you start treatment, because I think if you don't investigate things thoroughly at the start, you end up at the end, much like I have, feeling really disappointed and a little bit let down because there are things that you think with hindsight could have potentially been done differently.
And we're talking at the end of March with coronavirus being the main topic of everybody's conversation. And we've just shared an episode talking about the impact on fertility treatment and what these conversations that we're having now are really to kind of hear the actual story. So tell us what's gone on in the kind of last couple of days.
Well, we actually started our cycle with our donor. We'd both started down regulation, so we were at the point to start stims, and our donor went for her baseline scan in the morning. My scan was due in the afternoon because there's quite a distance between us. There's about 300 miles. So I was having my scan done locally. She went for her scan. We were told everything was fine to go ahead. She was due to start her stims the next day. And then later in the afternoon, I'd actually rang the clinic because I started to get this gut feeling. I saw how the news was escalating. And I got a phone call back fairly quickly to say that unfortunately they'd been given guidance by the HFEA, which has led to them stopping all donor cycles. I think from what I understood, I'll be honest, we didn't get an awful lot of explanation, but I suspect that's because a lot of people's treatments were unfortunately being cancelled. But I think it was the Transplant Society and the HFEA had given some guidance at that point to indicate that donor cycles should be suspended.
Oh, that must have been devastating news. For both of you, I'm sure, for the fact that you got this far and then having to stop.
Yeah, and bless her. She's incredibly supportive and she's just so desperate to help us, which she's an amazing individual, and she was really adamant that she wanted to give us a baby by Christmas. So yeah, we'd had conversations that had, led to you getting your hopes up. And it's not really just myself and my husband, it's our families as well. My grandparents were desperate for this treatment to happen. So it's incredibly disappointing. I actually felt really sorry for the clinic nurse who made the phone call, to be honest, because she sounded like she'd had a real battering already.
Yeah, I bet she'd had to do a lot of those calls.
Yeah, and I can imagine, I mean, I was honestly in shock. I was on my way for my scan. So for all I had, in some senses, expected it, I was completely shocked that it had just ended so abruptly. I half expected them to maybe say, we'll do it, but we'll do a freeze all embryos. I don't think I fully expected it to be stopped completely, but she really did sound like she'd had a very difficult afternoon of conversations. So I think I apologised to her.
And it would be lovely to be able to say to you now, so where does this leave you and what are the next steps? But of course, none of us know what the next few weeks or months is going to bring, and equally when things like donor treatments can resume again. So you kind of left feeling in limbo.
Absolutely, and I've asked as politely as possible of the clinic if they could give any indication. Obviously they can't at all. I've been trying to keep track of the guidance on the HFEA website, but it actually seems like that's getting more woolly rather than any more clarity. I think I read one day and it did say specifically donor treatments shouldn't be happening and gave all of the background, and then when I looked again the next day it had all changed and it became a lot more advisory than it had been. So I did wonder if maybe some things might start again, because it had become a little bit more advisory. And now I understand that our clinic stopped all fertility treatments. It isn't just donor cycles, they've actually suspended all IVF. And I suspect when it restarts, it'll be standard IVF that restarts, and then donor eggs and donor gametes will probably be lagging behind again.
So in terms of coping now with what's going on anyway, which we're all struggling with the weirdness of what life is like, adding this into it, what you doing to keep your chin up? And for anybody listening, you might be, having gone through a similar thing. I think we know that when you're trying to conceive, you get very patient, even though you are impatient because you want it. But how are you and your other half? How are you coping, and what are you doing?
So I was going to be really honest, and then you said it should be advice for other people.
No, be honest.
I think I started out with a certain level of denial, and actually just totally ignoring it and trying not to think about it too much. And that's the real issue at the minute, is that the media is just so bombarded and overtaken with coronavirus that I think everybody's just terrified, and it's that total lack of certainty around anything. It gives you that constant sense of anxiety and unease, regardless of anything, never mind going through IVF. So I think for me, I've really just had to park it and think, it's not going to happen. I'm not going to get pregnant. We had Mother's Day yesterday, and I just thought, well, let's be honest, next Mother's Day is not going to be any different for us. We're probably still going to be in this situation. We can't even really hope now that I might be pregnant by then. So I think for me, particularly in my line of work, working in the NHS, I'm trying to just throw myself into work and really avoid any fertility thoughts. And it's really difficult when you can't even spend time with your family and your friends to get that support from them. So it is a lot of, talking to people on the phone, distraction, avoidance, doing puzzles in the house, finding something good on Netflix, and really just trying not to focus on what impact coronavirus is having on our donor cycle at the moment.
And I think that's all you can do, Jen, isn't
Yeah.
it? I'm learning over the last few weeks, this whole coronavirus thing, it seems like every single person has some impact on them, and no matter what it is, it's there's something for every single person that I know, and I'm sure I can't imagine that anyone is getting away with any type of impact. And obviously to these people, those impacts are huge regardless of what they might be. And I think all we can do is close our doors and just be. That's all we can do, is just to be.
Just
and
muddle through
with your nearest and dearest, and that's all you can do.
Yeah, and that's it. It's people's weddings, it's people's holidays, it's people's fertility treatments, and I don't think there's any room for comparison, to be honest. I've seen a lot on Instagram of comparison. Cancer seems to keep coming up in comparisons, and I don't think there is a comparison. No. This is life and death for those people, and that's my daily work. I see this day in, day out, and I do think that helps me, that working in the NHS gives me that little bit of perspective to be able to say it's on hold, it's not necessarily forever. Some other people are literally, their lives are going to be affected by this. The vulnerable, their lives are potentially going to be shortened by this. Waiting a little bit longer after 8 years, it's going to be a fraction of what we've been through so far. So waiting a little bit longer, in the grand scheme of things, at least I can have a glass of wine at the weekend.
Oh, Jen. Well, thank you so much for just talking it through with us. And it's almost impossible to know what to say other than you just being really sensible about it, and you're doing amazing work. And, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for that. And for all of your colleagues, if you can go and do a big arm, elbow thing on our behalf for them.
Yeah.
Do you feel that you need to take a step back from the kind of online TTC community with what's gone on? Because I think there's a bit of self-protection with that, isn't there, if things have been cancelled?
Yeah, and I think there's actually a lot of unease on Instagram at the minute. I've seen so many different perspectives. Some people understandably feeling quite angry and bitter, some people who are quite accepting, and then there were those people who just had positive pregnancy tests, or who are pregnant or have just given birth, who are terrified as well. And it's actually where, before everybody really came together for each other in these times of anxiety, there seems to be a little bit of, sadly, separation and distancing, because people in a similar position to me are struggling to support those who are at a different stage, because it's quite triggering sometimes to see and hear that. And as much as we want to support them, it's really hard sometimes to put somebody else's shoes on and think how they are feeling when you're really quite sad, and there's an element of grief for yourself. And as much as, I think we've all got friends there who are true friends, there is, I think, just a little bit of unease around everybody finding it hard to see other people's perspectives, which is quite a shame.
I think we all need to self-protect. We need to do whatever we need to in terms of what we're looking at online for now, and not dwell on that. If we don't feel right being in a space, just do what, follow your gut and come out of it and self-protect.
And or use the mute. I think if you've got my feed particularly, it's started 2.5 years ago, so my feed particularly is absolutely jammed full of pregnancies, babies, people trying for their second, which is hard. And sometimes just the mute button. You don't need to unfollow necessarily, just mute them, and you don't have to see that every day. When you're in a better place, you can always go and follow them again and see how they're getting on.
Thank you, Jen. You take care.
Thank you. Take care.
Lovely to chat, Jen.
Please do rate, review, subscribe and share this podcast. We love hearing from you and knowing what you think. Thank you as always for your support. Stay safe, stay home, and until the next time.